It is my extreme pleasure to welcome tonight's speaker. Doug Perks recently retired as historian of the Jefferson County Museum. He serves as historian for Elmwood Cemetery Association and is a director of the Jefferson County Historical Society. In 2023, his latest publication came out, The Civil War Years in Jefferson County, Virginia. And Doug was named a West Virginia History Hero in 2017, and in 2022 was named the Historian Laureate of Shepherdstown. So please welcome Doug to the stage.
How does this go down, Jerry? Time for an advertisement. Thank you, Jerry. And I'm sure most of you have, but if you haven't, you got to visit the Antler Museum. It's a gem. And I also want to honor Jerry and the members of the Board of Directors of Historic Shepherdstown Commission for the good work they do. The museum is a perfect example of that, and they're all volunteer. They get paid exactly what you do for being here tonight. So let's give the Board of Directors a hand for Historic Shepherdstown. Really close? Is that better? All right. Yeah, I don't have much voice at all, so we'll give it a go. Shepherdstown, once again, is first. And as Bill Sensitive knows, that's hard for me to say as a Charlestown boy. But Shepherdstown is a first. This is, of course, the 250th anniversary of these men who clothed themselves and walked to Cambridge. In our neck of the woods, there are 4 of these rifle companies. There were 2 in Frederick County, Maryland, 1 here in what was then Berkeley County, Virginia, and 1 in Frederick County, Virginia. But Shepherdstown commemorates the men who marched on June 14th. A week later, Frederick County will commemorate those men. And in July, on the 26th, Frederick County, Virginia finally gets its act together, and it will commemorate. So Shepherdstown leads again. Set out from Potomac. That quote comes from a man who kept a journal, who was one of those who marched. Sergeant Henry Bedinger kept a daybook and recorded on a daily basis everything that he observed on the 26 days of march to Cambridge. And notice the spelling of the word Potomac. That's one of 52,363 versions. You know, if you do any historic research, especially before Social Security was passed, clerks will drive you crazy, because clerks write what they hear. And when it says Potomac, it can be spelled P-A-T-O-W, P-A-T-O, M-A-C-K, M-A-C, and a wide variety of other spellings. Same thing with family names. For those of you who are genealogists, you know how, and we had a family that they didn't have an E, and 2 brothers got into a spat, and brother 1 added an E to the end of his name. So with those words, this story begins. I've had a lot of time to think about what to talk about tonight. And I probably have someone asked if I was going to write a book, and I probably have enough to write about a book, but I won't talk about it all tonight. But the first thing I thought about was this guy, Dr. James Carter Price, the first historian laureate of Shepherdstown. You may have known him as Jim, but I didn't. I knew him as Dr. Price. I met him through his son, Jimmy. We taught together at Jefferson High School. Jimmy had juvenile diabetes and died in 1989. He and I were really good friends. And because of that friendship, I became friends with Dr. Price. Now, initially, it wasn't a warm relationship because I had committed transgressions. First, I was born in Charlestown. And second, I was twice, not once, but twice, the quarterback of the Purple Panther football team that drubbed the Shepherdstown Cardinals. Sorry, Bob. And not only that, I married a Shepherdstown cheerleader. And we moved to Charlestown. But her father held out, the postmaster of Shepherdstown, C.B. Carter, and persuaded us to come back to Shepherdstown in 1974, and we did so. We've been here since. Now, if you know anything about Jim Price, you know that he loved three things. He loved his church, he loved his family, and he really loved Shepherdstown. Anything and all things about Shepherdstown. What is the name of the old colonial road that connected Packhorse Ford to York, PA? Anybody? The Philadelphia Wagon Road. And you know why, according to Dr. Price, it was called the Philadelphia Wagon Road? Because when you crossed the Potomac at Packhorse Ford and came up the hill and came into Shepherdstown, everybody said, "Oh, we must be in Philadelphia." Couldn't convince him otherwise. And like Dr. Price, I'm a local guy. I'm a local historian. My focus is on the property that exists north of the survey line at the southern boundary of our county, south of the Potomac River, regardless of how it's spelled, west of the Blue Ridge of Mountains, and east of the Opequon. That's my focus. So as I begin to prepare, being a local historian, I spent time looking at local histories. And this is what I found out. First went to Clifford Musser. If you're looking for things to read about Shepherdstown in particular, this is a good one. And he does 200 years of history. But doggone it, when I looked at him, although he covered lots of territory, he didn't cover very much on the Beeline March. As a matter of fact, this is what he had to say. On page 5051, during the Revolutionary War, Captain Hugh Stevenson, spelled Stevenson, organized a company and made their famous Beeline March for Boston. Next item. I mean, that was it. He did mention, however, a Revolutionary War veteran, a man by the name of George Shaner. In 1820, George Shaner appeared before the town council and had to have his property evaluation certified because Congress, in its wisdom, had decided that all these American veterans, in order to continue to receive their pension, had to verify the valuation of their property, and it shouldn't be too much because we're not going to pay you if you got a lot of property. Some things never change. Now, I told you I don't pay too much attention to Berkeley County, okay? But I had to look at Willis Evans because what he wrote was before Jefferson County, we gave Berkeley County permission to break away from us in 1801. So I did do that. looked to see what old Willis Evans had to say. He mentioned the fact that Berkeley County was home to 6 distinguished officers during the American Revolution, and that's so minus one. He included Daniel Morgan. And Rusty, you know, Daniel Morgan was from Frederick County, not from Berkeley County. We had lots of Morgans, but not that one. He also made, and I don't know whether this is where the confusion begins or not, but he says they assembled at Morgan Springs at the site of Morgan's Grove Fairgrounds. And we know that's not right. We know that the Morgan's Grove Fair Association purchased the grounds of the Boatler family in 1899, and they moved the fair across the street from Morgan's Grove, there where Ed and his wife live at Falling Spring. So, next, too much technology. I went to the Dean of Jefferson County History, Dr. Bouchon, and looked to see what he would say about the Beeline March to Cambridge. He covered it in Chapter 3, The Revolution. I was a little surprised to see that he said, the Dean of Jefferson County said, that these men left Mecklenburg on July the 16th. Well, we know that's not right. He missed it by a day. They took off on July the 17th. But the more I read about his count of the Beeline March, the more I recognized that what he had done was to rely on this book. He relied on the writings of Carolyn, Dane, Danska, Bedinger, Dandridge, who wrote a comprehensive history of Shepherdstown from beginnings to about James Rumsey. Of course, she is a Bedinger, and she shows some partiality to the Bedinger family, but that's okay. But for the purposes of what I'm going to talk about tonight, she did 4 important things, included them in her book. First, she included a roster of the men who were in Stevens Rifle Company, very valuable. Second, her great-uncle Henry had recorded, as I said before, in his journal, a day-to-day account of what occurred on the march, and she included that in her book. She also included a couple of letters written by Henry Bedinger in his old age, sometime in the 1830s probably. He was writing about his friend Samuel Finley, and apparently writing to Finley's son, Samuel Berkeley Finley, who wanted to know something about his dad. You know, what do you know about my dad during the American Revolution? And you can imagine if you had that opportunity what you might write and what you might say. And a tremendous job on her part to research the men from the Shepherdstown area who had some role, not just in the Beeline, but in other companies as well, serving in a variety of capacities. And she gave a brief bio of each of those men. So it is basically Danska Dandridge's historic Shepherdstown that I'll refer to in my brief remarks. Any questions so far? I prefer, and I don't know about you, but at my point in life, it's probably better for me to ask questions as I think about them than to hold on to them. So, you know, I'm a former teacher, so you won't upset me by raising your hand and asking a question. Yes, sir.
How do you think that she was able to compile the roster of all the men? Okay. All right. So,
You and I think alike. All right. How am I doing with sound? Okay? All right. Okay, this story starts in September of 1774. Representatives from 12 colonies, and there's still 12 colonies in 74, decided to meet in Philadelphia, and they met to discuss what they're going to do about the old intolerable acts. Okay? They were there from September the 5th until October the 26th. Virginia was represented by a number of esteemed men: Benjamin Harrison, Richard Bland, Patrick Henry, Richard Henry Lee, Edmund Pendleton, Peyton Randolph, and George Washington. Peyton Randolph was elected president of the First Continental Congress. So here's what they decided to do. First, Suffolk County, Massachusetts had proposed a series of resolves, and they were in response to the intolerable acts and what they suggested be done. And one of those things was to raise a militia. They were already on guard in anticipation of what they thought was going to happen. As you remember now in your U.S. history, did you have me for U.S. history? As you remember in your U.S. history, that there's a lot of activity, and it's all centered on Boston. Boston is the focal point for the initial difficulties between Great Britain and the 13 English colonies. Raise a militia. Finally, they decided that by December 1774, they would no longer accept British imports. Some things never change, do they? Yeah. And by September of 1775, they were no longer going to export to Great Britain. At the very end, they adopted the Declaration of Resolves of the First Continental Congress, and that's a quote from those resolves. They listed the rights of colonists, and this is where it all begins. Colonists are entitled to life, liberty, and property. Colonists are entitled to the foundation of that English liberty and of all free government is a right in the people to participate in their legislative council. So here's where it all begins. They itemized their objections to British rule. They didn't blame King George, but he certainly had played a role in it and sent it off to London. They agreed to convene again in May of 1775. This is after some of these things had taken effect. They were back May 10th, 1775. And of course, at that date, what had happened in Lexington and Concord on April the 19th. So there was some serious thought given this time to what they were about to do. After more than a month of debate, the Congress decided to send support to the Army near Boston. Now, of course, the Army at that time is the Minutemen of Massachusetts and militia from New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. But it was obvious against the greatest army in the world, there's going to need more help. So, on Wednesday, June 14, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the Continental Congress wrote an act that resolved that 6 companies of expert riflemen be immediately raised in Pennsylvania, 2 in Maryland, and 2 in Virginia. That each company will consist of a captain who was paid the grand total of $20 a month. That's $814 today. 3 lieutenants who received $13 and a third, $541.58 today. 4 sergeants, $8 a month, $325 today. 4 corporals, $7 and a third, $297 today. A drummer or a trumpeter, $6 and 2/3, $271 today. And 68 privates at $6.23. A total of 81 men. The last part of the act said that each company, as soon as completed, shall march and join the army near Boston under the command of the chief officer of that army. And the next day, they elected the quiet Virginian, George Washington, to be the commander-in-chief of those forces. Now, this is a map that was drawn in 1751 by Joshua Fry and Peter Jefferson. The title of the map is A Map of the Most Inhabited Part of Virginia, containing the whole province of Maryland with part of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and North Carolina. Whew. Now, these were two experienced surveyors. They had been on the party that surveyed the Fairfax line that connected the Fairfax Stone in what is today Tucker County, West Virginia, to the Conway River in Rappahannock, Virginia. That straight line today serves as the border for Shenandoah County, still exists. They were also joint surveyors of Albemarle County, so they knew what they were doing. And they set about to make this map. And I have very rudely drawn, as you can see, an outline of the counties in the valley. Initially, the whole lot was Frederick County, Virginia, starting in 1738. But in 1772, the county was divided into three parts. Frederick in the middle, Berkeley on the north, and at the time, Dunmore County on the south. Now, Dunmore will fall out of favor as the last royal governor of Virginia, and in 1776, they will replace his name with the name Shenandoah. So, now, look at that little spot as compared to the whole of the colony of Virginia. You know, it's just an island in the west, okay? So, it begs the question, why was there a rifle company formed in Berkeley County? Berkeley was brand new, 1772. Look at all the counties to the east. Simple answer. The militia formed in the Piedmont and the Tidewater of Virginia were focused on the ports. They were focused on protecting the ports. That was their responsibility, to keep commerce open, to keep it flowing. Any rifle companies formed in the West were more involved in dealing with the natives who may be there. And thus, when they were formed, it was logical that they would be selected from Berkeley and Frederick to represent Virginia in the march to Cambridge. Next thing, why Mecklenburg? Again, very logical. Mecklenburg was the only cotton-picking town that had been approved by the General Assembly. Mecklenburg is founded in 1762. Martinsburg doesn't come on board till 1778. Charlestown, 1786. Smithfield later, 1798. So it was a logical place. And you have to understand, too, that the bulk of the population in Berkeley County in 1775 was in the east. Okay? You see that very clearly in 1810, the first U.S. census taken in Jefferson County. In 1810, there were more people in Jefferson County than in Berkeley County, which still included Morgan County. So the concentration of population was here in this eastern part of Berkeley County. That's where people want to be. We understand that. Sorry, Linda. So, remember that in the First Continental Congress, the edict was to establish militia, and that got underway here in the frontier in November, December 1774. There were committees of safety established in these counties. I have been unable to determine exactly who was on the Committee of Safety here in Berkeley County. We know it was active. We just don't know who was on it. I suppose it were some of the justices who served Berkeley County, men like Samuel Washington, Samuel Nurse, the Swearingen fellows. They more than likely were part of that Committee of Safety. They appointed, because it was the right and responsibility of the Committee of Safety to appoint a captain of the militia company, and they appointed Hugh Stevenson. And Stevenson set Mecklenburg, today Shepherdstown, as his point of rendezvous, and this is where they would meet. And he sent officers appointed by the Committee of Safety out into the community to begin to recruit. Now, you remember that Congress said that each company would be comprised of a captain and 3 lieutenants. Let's take a peek at these men, because that's one of the things I want to try to do. Very often when you read histories, you read about the top guy and you don't read about the other fellows. So I'm going to make an effort to talk a little bit about the other fellows as well as the guys at the top. You bet Hugh Stevenson. Stevenson was well qualified. He'd been a captain in the French and Indian War and had served in Lord Dunmore's War at the Battle of Point Pleasant as a captain of infantry. So he was well qualified to be in his position. The Committee of Safety elected 3 lieutenants, William Henshaw, George Scott, not George C. Scott. And as the 3rd lieutenant, they elected Yost Height's grandson, Thomas Height. His pop was Jacob, who lived at Hopewell, today Leetown. But for some reason, he declined to serve. So the 3rd, 4th lieutenant, and this is confusing, when you look at these rosters, very often it looks as if Stevenson's company had 4 lieutenants. It did not. It had 3 because of Thomas Height's refusal to serve. Also had 4 sergeants. Now the sergeants were elected by the company. So once the company of militia had formed, the sergeants put their, or the men put their heads together and selected the sergeants. Henry Bedinger, who wrote the journal. Josiah Flagg, the Flagg family will eventually own Richwood Hall, Richwood Farm, which was one of Samuel Washington's sons' home out on Earl Road. William Kelly and Samuel Finley. And Finley, if you'll remember, Henry Bedinger writes to Finley's son, Samuel Berkeley Finley, about his father's experiences. Finley is a PA native, as are many of these men. They've come to this area from Pennsylvania. And you hear this a lot. In 1776, he moved up and was 1st lieutenant in Abraham Shepard's company. He was a prisoner of war at the Battle of Fort Washington in November 1776, exchanged in 1780. 4 years on one of those ships. In 1781 was a major of a cavalry regiment. He lived after the war in Chillicothe, Ohio, and died in Pennsylvania at Philadelphia in 1829. 4 corporals. Michael Bedinger, Henry Barrett, David Miller, and John Crawford. The Crawford family deserves a little special mention. They were great friends with General Washington prior. They were also, William Crawford was a surveyor. His brother John was the 1st corporal for Stevenson's Rifles, and they were stepbrothers with Hugh Stevenson. Hugh Stevenson's dad, Richard, his wife died. He was a widower. And Crawford's father, William, died and left his wife, Cornelia, a widow, and they married and raised a family together. And they lived just before Ripon, below where Rusty and his family lived, at Beverly. The Crawford family got its start there, and it's recorded that General Washington visited there as a youth. A drummer or a trumpeter? Well, we got a drummer, and his name is Stephen Vardine. And trumpeters or drummers were very important because they regulated daily life in camp, told you when to eat, told you when to march, and on the battlefield did the same thing. They gave direction, if you turn right, turn left, so they were very important. And Vardine was captured and exchanged at the Battle of Fort Washington and was still on the Virginia line in 1799. Ensign William Powell. Now remember, you're only supposed to have 3 lieutenants, but Stevenson selected a 4th, which they called an ensign. In a rifle company, a 4th lieutenant wasn't called lieutenant, he was called an ensign. And he would become, after reorganization, a lieutenant in William Brady's company. And good thinking. Wasn't in the act passed by Congress, but Stevenson and his group had the foresight to draft Dr. Garrett Tennyson, who came to Mecklenburg in 1773. And when they got to Boston, he served as the surgeon for not only Stevenson's company, for 2 others. After the war, he returned home to New Jersey. And 68 privates. So I can't name something about all these men, but I'll pick out a person or 2. You see this guy in red, and I'll tell you a little bit about him based on what Dansky Dandridge had to say. William Anderson was a private. In June 1776, he enlisted or re-enlisted in Abraham Shepherd's company, was captured at the Battle of Fort Washington. Sometimes you make tough decisions. Joined the British Army to save his life. William McHugh. On April the 9th, 1776, this is before their enlistment's up, William McHugh, and this is Henry Bedinger writing, William McHugh of our company had the misfortune to have his left hand blown off by firing his rifle, which bursted above half the length of the barrel, blew away the lock, and tore his hand in a shocking manner, so that it has been taken off at the wrist. And for this, he received a pension of $40 a month. Nathaniel Pendleton. He also re-enlisted after their enlistment was up in June of '76, became first lieutenant of Captain Gabriel Long's company. November 16th, like a lot of these men, was captured at the Battle of Fort Washington, exchanged in 1780, was captain in Colonel Moses Rawlings' Maryland and Virginia Regiment. And in 1804, he was real good friends with Aaron Burr. And when Burr had his famous duel, Nathaniel Pendleton was his second. Familiar name here, Adam Sheets, younger brother of his rifle-making brothers. On Tuesday, July the 25th, while they were en route, Adam Sheets had such violent fits that we were afraid for his life. Now, he recovered and went all the way to Cambridge. He also became part of Captain Abraham Shepherd's company, captured Battle Fort Washington, but soon exchanged. December 1788, he became a captain in Colonel Matthew Jewett's company. John Curry, on February 27, 1776, deserted to the British in the night. Michael Engel, On June 1776, re-enlisted, died on a prison ship, and he was the brother of Philip Engel. Patrick Vaughn, in June 1776, re-enlisted in Captain Abraham's company. November 13th, died. Where'd I put it? And finally, George and William Tabb. On October 1775, on hearing of the death of another brother, these young men obtained a discharge, and the discharge read as thus: whereas the bearers, William and George Tabb, riflemen in Major Stevenson's company, having served with courage and fidelity, and with due obedience to their officers, but by the unfortunate death of their elder brother, it is necessary for the settlement of their affairs, for the assistance of the widow and children of their deceased brother, that they should be gratified in having their discharge and permission to return to their home. They are hereby discharged, given at the camp before Boston, October 3rd, 1775, signed Horatio Gates. So these fellows, and I verified this with a descendant, George Tabb, talked with him and asked what he could tell me about it, and he sent me the discharge papers. So those are the men. Those are the men who clothed themselves and walked 26 days all the way from Mecklenburg to Cambridge to find their own clothes. I borrowed this watercolor. It was done in 1781 by a Frenchman. There are actually 4 people in the watercolor. I've clipped just the 2 on the right. The one on the right, and I don't know what in the world he's holding, but he's described as a French officer, so I guess that makes sense. I don't know. But the gent next to him is a frontier rifleman. And both Dandridge and Henry Bedinger and Alexander Boteler had contributions as to what these men looked like as they marched away. Henry Bedinger said that all of them had an approved rifle, a handsome shot pouch, and a powder horn, a blanket, a knapsack, and a hunting shirt, and pantaloons fringed on every edge. And you can see the fringe on that jacket there. Alexander Boteler, in his book, or the little pamphlet, My Ride to the Barbecue, said that each of the men had a bucktail in his hat, a tomahawk, and a skinning knife. And you can see the tomahawk there on his belt. Finally, Danska Dandridge said that each of the men had embroidered on the chest of their shirt the words, liberty or death. So these are accounts of what these fellows looked like as they marched away. Now, this is an iron-mounted rifle. The web page that I took it from, and I'm putting it right back, attributed the gun to to Henry and Philip Sheets of Mecklenburg. I talked with Wayne Goodrich, and Wayne said that attribution is not enough, but more accurately, this is what a gun that he might have made would look like. We can't prove that this is one, but this is what it would look like. These guns became part of the story because even though they mustered in on June 22nd, they didn't leave until July 17th. And Henry Bedinger gave this explanation for the delay. Again, writing to Samley Berkeley Finley, these companies being thus unexpectedly called for, it was a difficult task to obtain rifles the quality required, and we were detained at Shepherdstown nearly 6 weeks, of course it's closer to 4, before we could obtain a gun. And the next, in 1776, there is some evidence that supports this. because in May 1776, brothers Henry and Philip Sheets subscribed themselves as gunsmiths of Mecklenburg in the county of Berkeley and agreed to make and deliver at their shop 24 good and well-fixed rifles per month. So if they could only make 24 guns a month, that may be at least a partial explanation as to why these men couldn't get the proper rifle and take away any sooner. And if you have the opportunity, be sure to see that display at the Antler. It's well worth the time. It's well displayed. And as Jerry said, it's quite an impressive collection. So there's our map. We talked about that being the interactive version being available on the Historic Shepherdstown Commission's webpage. And the neat thing about the map on the webpage, if you touch the sites, the words that Henry Bedinger wrote in his journal will come up. So you can see what he said at each of those locations along the way. So that's pretty neat. I had intended to talk to you a lot about that, but I see my time's just about up, so I'm going to cut it short and give you just a few of my favorites, okay? And you've got to start with day one, July 17th on a Monday. Bedinger simply said, set out from Potomac toward Boston and encamped at the Maury Springs, 3 miles from Sharpsburg. And it's on the other side of Sharpsburg. There's a spring there today. So we know that that's what they did. First day, about an 8-mile walk. 2 days later, on Wednesday, they got to Fredericktown. 2 company of independents met us 3 miles from town. We marched before them into town. Sounds like a Chinese fire drill. We marched before them into town, then they marched by us, and we halted, and we followed them out of town, and they halted, and we passed by. That's precise marching. You know, I guess they were getting ready for the battlefield. Boys will be boys. On Sunday, the 7th of the 23rd of July, the 7th day of the march, we marched the Susquehanna River and crossed it and encamped about a half mile from the river. But before the company had all crossed, several went to the tavern, where James Higgins shot a wad into William Blair's leg. He was left behind. There were 3 of these men who had some malady or another on the march of 26 days, but all of them made it to Cambridge at some point in time. So we're glad that William Blair got okay. Adam Sheets got sick. John Keyes got sick. I don't think there are any children in the room. The day before they got to Cambridge, Henry Bedinger on Thursday, August the 10th, said this: "Thence marched 29 miles to a tavern where there were 3 girls. Had some diversion. 26th Friday, August the 11th, the 26th day and final day of the march, they were in Massachusetts. They started and marched 16 miles before breakfast, 9 miles to Watertown, saw some riflemen belonging to the camp, thence 3.5 miles to headquarters in Cambridge. Being Friday, 11th August, was viewed by Generals Washington, Gates, and a number of other gentlemen, was placed into the church." So their journey was over. Now, in those 26 days, they had spent a half a day in Virginia, 3 days in Maryland, 10 days in Pennsylvania, 2 days in New Jersey, 3 days in New York, 4 days in Connecticut, and 3.5 days in Massachusetts. The other companies, Daniel Morgan arrived on August the 6th. Cressup and Price both arrived on August the 9th. And very briefly, I'd like to mention what they did during the time of their enlistment, this 12 months. For most of the time until March of 1776, they spent there at Roxbury Camp around Boston. That's, of course, where the British were. When the British withdrew and moved to New York, they followed and were posted on Manhattan. Their Bedinger wrote in great detail about a skirmish which they had at long range with Navy warships. I don't know why they're skirmishing with a warship, but anyway. And they also got into it with their landing parties. In 1776, their enlistment ended. The Continental Congress created the Maryland Rifle Regiment June 17, 1776, composed of 9 companies for 3 years. The regiment was to be comprised of 5 rifle companies from Virginia, including Stevenson's and 4 new ones, and 4 companies from Maryland, Cressup and Price, plus 2 new ones. Stevenson was kicked up. He became colonel of the new regiment, and Abraham Shepherd was promoted to captain of Stevenson's regiment, so he took over. And that's why the number of men that I mentioned who said that they joined Abraham Shepherd's company, it's because they remained as part of the original company, now captained by Abraham Shepherd. Bedinger, in his diary, said on June the 24th, just got leave and made ready to start home. So his enlistment was up, and he was going to go home, at least for a time. We know he came back, but at least for a time. On July the 4th, Stevenson was sent by Washington to Philadelphia, and he was to advise Congress about the promotions to men in the Virginia companies who would be part of the Maryland and Virginia Regiment. As soon as that was done, he came home to the Bullskin. And there's a mystery. Some say he had camp fever. Some say he had a mysterious illness. But regardless, he died. We don't know exactly when, sometime in July or August of 1776. So he was never able to fulfill his duties as colonel of the new regiment.
Who died? I didn't say.
Hugh Stevenson. Hugh Stevenson. Any other questions? Almost done.
Everybody walked, or did some of the higher-ups have horses to go on that trip?
Apparently they all walked. There's no mention in Bedinger's account that anyone was on horseback.
Did they not have horses?
Oh, sure they did. But you have to, these guys were living off the land, I think. I think that's probably a logical reason, but I don't know for sure. Yeah.
The monument that you showed with the names and stuff, is that somewhere we can go?
It is, and I should have, I neglected. The monument was put.
Could you speak in the mic, please?
The monument was placed by Packhorse Ford DAR in 1932, commemoration of George Washington's birthday. And it was placed on the Carneysville Pike, just outside the limits of Shepherdstown, at the lane that led back to Falling Springs. You know, today, if you stopped there to try to see it, you'd get run over. So in 2012, Packhorse Ford got permission and moved it where it is today, inside the gates at Elmwood Cemetery. So it's right there. Thanks for asking that question. I neglected to mention that. Other questions? Rusty?
Just curious about the ages of the men that went. Is there any information about that? They must have been a hardy bunch.
Yeah, and
What was the question?
some of them have their age. You know, Steve,
Repeat the question.
the question was, what about the ages of these men? We know Stevenson and Daniel Morgan had some age because they were both French and Indian, and were active at that point in time. So, but Adam Sheets is the younger brother of the Sheets fellas. Daniel Morgan was just a little, or Daniel Bedinger was just a little younger than Michael and Henry. and he couldn't go at that time. So I have a feeling that some of these men were in their early 20s. The guy that Shaner, who applied for a pension in the town council in 1820, must have been about 65 years of age. That would have made him 25 at the time. So, but I don't know. I've not seen any listing. Craig?
You mentioned that it seems like a lot of people had unfortunate results at the Battle of Fort Washington.
Fort Washington.
Fort Washington.
Fort Washington.
Where's Fort Washington?
It's in New York.
Was that a defeat for the Communists?
It certainly was a huge defeat. There were nearly 1,300 prisoners. And because Abraham Shepherd's company was right there on the front line, they took a huge loss. Yeah. But November 1776. Other questions? Linda?
People, were some of the men killed there? How many of them died?
Well, a number of them died, but not necessarily in battle. There were, as you can imagine, Jerry was talking about being on a cruise at Christmas time and how many people got sick. Camp fever was a real deal. And, if one got it, the likelihood was that a lot of people are going to get it. Yes, ma'am.
How did they eat along the way? What were the provisions? How did they get food?
They were eating off the land, and that's what you see mostly in Henry Bedinger's journal. He talked about where they went to eat, and for the most part, they were provided, folks knew what they were doing. Morgan had already been through, and Crest and Price were just a little bit ahead. So they knew that these Virginia riflemen were on the way, and they prepared a feast for them. So they weren't spending time out in the woods killing deer, but they were being feeded either at taverns along the way or by kin. When they were in Pennsylvania, they went through towns where their kinfolk lived, and they, of course, provided for them. Yes. Okay, home stretch. You might remember when I said something about Alexander Boatler's My Ride to the Barbecue. He mentioned the agreement that these men made when they left. You can imagine them in a circle holding hands and swearing that 50 years hence, whoever's still alive will come together and drink one more for our health. Well, that took place in 1825. May have been the first commemoration of the Beeline March. It was written up in the Harper's Ferry Free Press on June 12th, 1825. The Free Press in 7 years will move to Charlestown and become the Virginia Free Press. Starts out by saying, a party of ladies and gentlemen repaired on Friday the 10th of June for the purpose of celebrating the day pursuant to an arrangement made 50 years before. Now, Gallagher, who's the editor of the paper, said out of the 97 gallant spirits who composed the company, 5 only are living. Now, I told you I used Danska Dandridge's muster roll, and she has 94 men. You'll see 98. But I chose to go with Danska Dandridge and 94. The 2 men present at the barbecue were brothers. 4th Corporal Michael Bedinger and 4th Sergeant Henry Bedinger. They were the only 2 men who made it to the picnic in 1825. Michael Bedinger was living at Lower Blue Lick Springs. How about that for a descriptive name? Lower Blue Lick Springs in Nicholas County, Kentucky, and that's where he died December of 1843. Major Henry Bedinger lived in Berkeley County. at Protumna. But in his older age, his daughter, Elizabeth Bedinger Davenport, lived at Altoona in Charlestown, and he went to live with his daughter and her husband, Colonel Braxton Davenport, and that's where he died in May of 1843. The other three men who were alive but who were unable to attend were General Samuel Findlay, who was living at the time in Chillicothe, Ohio, and he died in 1829 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Private William Hulse lived in Wheeling, Virginia, died in 1830 at St. Clairsville, Belmont County, Ohio. And Judge Robert White lived in Winchester and died there in 1831. So, as we begin this commemoration of the semi-quincentennial of the Beeline March to Cambridge, Massachusetts, let's honor the memory of the men who found their own arms and clothes, who marched 600 miles in 24 days to join General Washington in the defense of American liberty. And I would like us, just as the citizens of Mecklenburg did on July 17, 1775, I'd like us to stand and give 3 loud shouts for the men of Stevenson's Rifle Company. Please stand. And we're going to use the cheer of the day, huzzah. 3 cheers for Captain Stevenson's Rifle Company. Huzzah! 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 Thank you.